one of the central core teachings of Buddhist practice is the teaching of impermanence, sometimes called the law of change and becoming. People think of impermanence as only the end of things, like we'll float off the end of the earth. But really it's the law of change and becoming. And so we see that everywhere in nature, don't we? And in all dimensions of life. Things are born, come into life, grow, and change. I remember my first love and my first death that I remember was a lady slipper orchid when I was a child. And I used to go out to the woods to this particular orchid and just would have conversations with her. She was beautiful, you know. And of course, as the seasons changed, she began to droop. And I remember as a little boy coming with forked sticks and trying to hold her up, you know. Until finally, of course, it became apparent to me, even as a young boy, that this was a fruitless venture. And I remember in the spring, the orchids would come back to life again. And there she was, you know, different, but still the same. When I remember my son first realizing that he would die, he was about 5 or 6 maybe. We were driving down a road past Grandpa Tom's house. And Grandpa Tom had died that year. And he said to me, that's Grandpa Tom's house. He died, you know. And I said, yes, he did. And then he said, are you going to die? And I said, yes, someday I'll die too. And then he said, will Mom die? And I said, yes, someday she'll die too. And after each of these responses, he kind of paused and would be silent for a while. And then, of course, the final question came, am I going to die? And I said, yes, someday you'll die too. And he paused for a long time, you know, as we kept driving down the road. And then he said, I guess that's the way it is, huh? I was called once to the home of a family whose 7-year-old boy had died. And I didn't know this family, but I drove to their home and I walked in the room, and there was the mom and dad and brothers and sisters, a few family friends. And there was this young boy, 7 years old, who had died. And following my intuition, I went over to him and I leaned over and kissed him on the forehead. And when I did this, the whole room broke into tears. Because while they had cared for him with great love, nobody had actually touched him since he died. And so I explained to this mom and dad how it would be possible for us to bathe their child, and that we could do this in a ritual-like way. And so we got washcloths and towels, and they were great gardeners, so we brought in herbs from the gardens and rose petals and made a beautiful bath for this boy. And this mom, you know, and as she washed down his body and got to his feet, she counted his toes. She said she'd done that when he was born. And sometimes this mom would look at me like, is this possible? Can I survive this? And my job was to stay in the room and sometimes just to hand her another washcloth, you know, to help her to go toward the suffering. I remember the two of them bathed him up the front of his body, and when this mom got to his face, you know, there was such tenderness between them. It was so beautiful to see. There was absolutely no separation between this mother and this child, maybe like the day he was born. My son was 7 years old at the time, and I remember that when I went home, I held him really closely that night, yeah. In the last year or so, I had 2 heart attacks, and part of that involved a triple bypass surgery. My son came to be with me, and we had a wonderful heart-to-heart conversation. He said to me, Dad, are you going to live through this? I said, I'm not taking sides. And it so surprised me. It was such a shocking thing for me to say, but it was so absolutely true that I couldn't deny it. And there was something about that that was so comforting to both him and to me, because it was the truth. I think it's hard to know how we come to be where we are in our lives. Most of us don't walk a straight line. In fact, there's a wonderful short story by Tagore where he talks about children walking from village to village in India and how they often walk barefoot. And during that time, all the paths meandered. And then the children got sandals, and they began to walk straight paths from one village to another. I think I meandered barefoot for a long time.